Hello everybody, good evening, welcome to Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, without Jonny Gybe. Jonny unfortunately has family business that he has to attend to at the last minute, unfortunately. So it's just me, again, tonight. But hopefully normal service will be resumed for Songwriting Simplified as soon as possible. And I'm really sorry that we're kind of having to change things kind of at the last minute on the fly at the moment, but unfortunately it is just the way it is. Sometimes life throws curveballs, and sometimes it throws a knuckleball, and last week was a curveball, this week is a knuckleball, and we're on 2 strikes. So who knows what will happen next? Maybe it'll be a nice fastball and I can smack it out the park. So, and maybe even tonight I can do that. So anyway, enough of the baseball analogies. I love baseball, which is why I can talk about it. Which is, I suppose, unusual for a Scot that I know something about baseball. But I do. I used to play baseball. I used to be a pitcher. And I used to pitch a decent fastball as a, 17, 18-year-old. And then I had a knuckleball that nobody could play because it was like half the speed of my fastball. Anyway. That's that. So, a very good evening to everybody who is here. And we have almost 10 people. Please go and grab the regular people that would normally be here for this show. If you know where they are, and, you know, they may be over waiting on Jonny's channel, please go and guide people over here. I would appreciate it a lot. I did post in the Songwriting Simplified Facebook group and also the HST Facebook group as well. It's kind of the 2 main places where I post about this show, because it is kind of a little bit niche and a little bit unique. But yeah, I have plans to expand our audience for this show. That I'm going to talk to Jonny about, so that we can just appeal to a much broader songwriting audience. So I've got some ideas that should maybe hopefully take Songwriting Simplified to the next level and maybe get a much bigger audience. So that would be very, very cool. So let's go see who is actually here. Billy Morgan was the first in the house, along with Louis from Alps Media. And people are starting to come in now. We're up to 12, which is cool. Let's see. Paul Morgan is here. John Edgar is here. Papa, I can never get this right. I'm going to get this right one day. Papa Raptor Music is here as well. And Don Oliver is here, as well as Keith Chadwick. So if you are here and you are watching, please do hit the subscribe button and the notification bell and select all notifications. That way you know when the show is, whether it's on my channel or Jonny's channel. You know, if it's on my channel, you'll get a notification. And also, I do a show on Sunday nights, if you're not aware, at the same time, which is pretty cool. This one is more aimed at songwriting, music theory, composing, arranging, that kind of stuff. Whereas my Sunday show is a bit more kind of broadly Studio One orientated, mixing, mastering, and those kind of things. And we'll do a little bit of tech support as well. So if you've got tech support issues, you can talk to me on Sunday about those. But for right now, and John Edgar says, good news, I was notified tonight. Yes, excellent. Yes, John Edgar is one of those guys who did not realize that although he was subscribed to this channel, he hadn't hit the notification bell, which he has now done. So now he is getting the notifications, and he knew when to be here because he got a nice little notification from YouTube. So yeah, make sure you hit that notification bell and select all notifications, because it's very, very useful. Because not only will you get to know about Wednesday and Sundays, but also any other videos that I come out with. And I am working on a whole slew of new videos, which are still in production, and they are going to be epic when they come out. I'm not saying any more, but they are absolutely going to blow your socks off when they come out. You're going to be very, very excited to see what I've got coming up. And yeah, it's going to be very exciting. I can't wait for you to see the new content that's coming out. And I really wish I could talk more about it, but I can't, because it would blow the whole thing, and I don't want to do that because that's not fair on you guys. So there we go. That's that. So that's kind of the news here. Is Jonny has to, at the last minute, drop everything and run and go and take care of an emergency with his family. So you got me and my green shirt for the next hour, just about. I have to apologize for the late start. I kind of sat down, I had everything set up, I was ready, and then I was just like, I've got to pee. So I had to go do that. So let's get started. Let's get your songwriting questions into the chat, and we will, your songwriting, your arranging, your composing questions, let's get them into the chat, and we'll get this show on the road. Waveform Laboratory is here as well. Might be more helpful if Alps Media posted the link to this channel rather than HST's. Oh, and he's just deleted his message. That's okay. Yeah, we do try, Alps Media and myself, to make sure that everybody gets the link to the show. Best thing to do is make sure you're subscribed and you've hit the notification bell. That way you're always going to know when the show is, when it's on this channel. So Louis says that would happen if I was informed ahead of time of the change. Yeah, I only knew about this literally a few minutes before we were going to start. So unfortunately, I could not do very much about it. But I'm hoping that, these kind of last minute changes are not going to happen again. But we're going to have to wait and see, and we're just going to have to be gracious and generous and kind and patient with everybody, myself included. All right, but yeah. So there we go. So that's kind of why Jonny's not here tonight. Because last minute he had to drop everything, and it's just the way life goes sometimes, and there's nothing any of us can do about it. So I apologize. Everybody. All right, let's get this show on the road. Secret Squirrel is here, and he says, good evening. As video game artists are signed/dropped from labels and sub/microgenres become more formulaic, please share some of the human emotional elements you find slipping. Okay, video game. I'm not really sure what you mean by that, because you put that in kind of quote marks. I could take you literally and say, composers for video games, but I'm not really sure what you're kind of referring to here. But yes, there are lots of microgenres, genres within genres, and that's just kind of the way music develops. You get genres within genres, and one genre gives birth to another, as is always the way. I mean, field songs gave birth to gospel music and blues music and jazz at the same time. I mean, jazz was a unique thing where kind of brass marching bands, Western music encountered those kind of field songs and church music, and kind of fused together, and a new genre was born called jazz. Now, jazz is a pretty broad, large thing. It's a massive entity, and within it there are lots of subgenres. There's Dixieland, traditional kind of jazz from the early 1910s, early 1920s, and then you get the beginnings of big band from the middle 1920s, and then from there you get swing, and you get Glenn Miller, and you get Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Billy Strayhorn, and lots of other great bands, Artie Shaw, the Dorsey Brothers. You get all sorts of great big bands at that period, and then out of that you get Billy Eckstine's band, and within Billy Eckstine's band you have Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. That's where they first met, and they first started developing what became bebop. And bebop basically was these musicians who played in these big bands coming together in jam sessions after hours, and they just developed this extraordinary new music out of what they already knew, and developed new things. And then that gave birth in itself to something a bit cooler, a bit simpler, that Miles Davis, who had been part of the bebop thing, developed, which was called cool jazz. And then you have people like Dave Brubeck, who introduced elements of classical music as well into the mix, and Stan Kenton, who had a big band, who, you know, brought elements of big band music and bebop together along with classical music, orchestral elements, and suddenly you have a completely new genre all over again. And then Miles Davis has a chance encounter with Jimi Hendrix, and he hears Jimi Hendrix's guitar playing, and he's just like, wow, this is amazing. And suddenly the sounds of rock are fused with jazz, and you get jazz fusion, you get Weather Report, you get there's bands that are on the tip of my tongue from that late 60s, early 70s period. You know, Miles Davis had his first fusion band. You get the Bitches Brew records, and they are seminal and amazing and blow everybody's minds, and that gives birth to Weather Report. Weather Report gives birth to bands like Steps Ahead in the early 1980s and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And suddenly you've got an entirely different form of jazz fusion going on, which is, and then of course after that you get people like Kenny G, and Kenny G has made himself an awful lot of money, and by fusing elements of pop music with kind of this whole kind of smooth, this cooler form of jazz, moving away very much from the complex chord changes of bebop into, you know, and so what I'm trying to say is there are lots of genres and subgenres within something like jazz. I mean, take jazz and all of that I've just given you a potted history of jazz music, and you know, transmogrify that to something else, a different genre, heavy metal maybe, what you would call broadly heavy metal, or what you would broadly call EDM, and within each of those umbrellas there's lots of multiple different genres and subgenres that have grown up out of these things. It's like, you know, when you plant a seed, you grow a tree. A tree is made up of lots of different things, branches, twigs, bark, all sorts, trunk for a start. And so that's how music develops. So music is really, really incredibly organic. That really is kind of like a potted history of jazz music, I guess. So some of the human / emotional elements that I find slipping. Actually, I think music, all music, even industrial, what they call industrial music, even though it's incredibly grid orientated and maybe a little bit robotic, is emotional. Every music form has emotional content, unless it's entirely 100% created by a machine. And there is a genre of music where that is happening, where people are actually creating software that actually composes music. Software actually exists that does that. And there are machines, robots that are being developed in Japan at the moment. This is just weird, but it's amazing at the same time. There are robotics people in Japan who are creating robots that play conventional real instruments like bass guitars, electric guitars, pianos, drums, the works. And these robots have AI software built into their processing units. And what they do is they listen to the other robots in this little robot band, and they interact with each other. So, the keyboard playing robot will hear what the bass playing robot is doing and will develop something like that. And it's kind of like they're trying to create what human beings do in a jam session context, but with robots. And it's amazing. Where that goes, nobody knows. Is it creative? Is it art? Definitely it is. And how much human input has been put into that, there is definitely some. But if you leave these robots to kind of just work on their own, what will they come up with? What genre of music will they develop organically, if I can use that term? That's an interesting proposition to me, anyway. All right, let's go see what else do we have. What do you think of the Tonnet's diagram by Leonard Euler? I have no idea what that is. I'll be really honest. Or I probably should have an idea of what that is, but I don't, it's been a very, very long time since I've looked at that kind of stuff. My God, he went full Dave and said transmogrify. Transmogrify, it's a great word. At least I didn't say transmogrify-ulated, but, Question intended context of modern profit margin drive into creating digitally compiled performers, such as FN Mecha. I don't even know what that is. I'm going to have to look that up because I have no idea what that is that you're referring to. But it's interesting, nonetheless, Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Keith says, and we all know that not all those Japanese robots can do. Yeah, they can do all sorts of things. If the robots start playing Kenny G, I'm out. Yeah, you're not kidding. In fact, if the robots all start playing Kenny G, let's send all the robots to Kenny G's house. And then you could have a whole orchestra of robot Kenny G impersonators on his lawn serenading the man himself. That would be hilarious. I would definitely watch that if that ever happened. Paul Morgan says Robot Rock. Yes. There is a band that I think that even might be its name, Robot Rock. And there's videos of it on YouTube. And I'm just I was actually, wow, that's incredibly impressive. They got these AI robots that they have programmed to be able to play like a bunch of rock musicians. It's amazing. Who knows where that will go? Some may say, hey, this is bad for music because, potentially these robots could put musicians out of business. They've been saying that ever since the drum machine was first invented. Ever since Roger Nichols walked into ABC Dunhill Records studios with Wendell when Steely Dan was recording the Gaucho record. All because Donald Fagen had been working with Roger to create loops of drum tracks that they had put down over several weeks in the studio. And they're putting thousands and thousands of hours of manually making these tape loops. And Donald Fagen turned to Roger Nichols and said, can't we just build a machine that will play the perfect drum track? And Roger Nichols, not only great recording engineer, great mixing engineer, but he was an inventor and he was a computer programmer. And so he went away and he developed Wendell, a drum machine, the world's first drum machine, which could play samples of real drums. So when you listen to the Gaucho record, particularly when you listen to tracks like Glamour Profession, the drum track on there is absolutely rock steady. The main groove was played by Wendell, the drum machine, and the drum fills were played by Steve Gadd. And that was the birth of drum machines and drum samples and sample replacement and all the things that we do in Studio One and other DAWs without really thinking about it. Every time you drag in Easy Drummer or, one of the other drum software out there like UJam's FAT, for example, every time you drag that into Studio One, you have to thank Roger Nichols, because he fundamentally pioneered the technology that made those plugins possible. And so when those first drum machines were first being built, and electric drums and Simmons and Linn drums and all of that were first being built, and machines that could actually play a drum pattern, everyone said, oh, that's going to put drummers out of business. Drummers were up in arms. Oh, this is going to put everybody... It didn't. It didn't. Steve Gadd is still the hardest working drummer in the world. Bernard Purdie is pretty much also the hardest working drummer in the world. Both of those two guys have been on a combined 1,200 albums together. So, you know, has it put drummers out of business? No. Will such technology as it's developed put musicians out of business? I don't think so. Will we have computers that can write a whole opera? Well, it's been done. It's actually been done. There is a computer that was developed with software and a programming language that actually composed its own opera. It was performed by real performers and an orchestra, real musicians, real vocalists and an orchestra. And actually, it's pretty good. You can, it's on YouTube. And it's actually pretty good. But here's the thing, they had to tell it what opera is, and they had to give it lots of listening materials for it to learn from. And so, you know, you give it a whole bunch of operas to kind of listen to and understand, and then it started applying the compositional techniques from these operas that it had learned to its own creative work, and the computer created an opera. It's pretty amazing. But again, are composers and librettists for operas out of business? No, and I don't think they will be. I think, you know, we're not going to completely rely 100% on computer-generated stuff. I don't think. But it's interesting, though. It's not a replacement for the circle of fifths, but I've been learning how it can be used. Okay. In musical tuning and harmony, the tonnets is a conceptual lattice diagram representing tonal space. Oh, I know what you're talking about now. Yes, I have seen it. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to it, I'll admit, Rich, but I have seen it. And it is certainly very, very interesting. And it's an interesting take on how key centers, tonal centers are related to each other, and how you know, it's just another way of being able to get from one place to another musically. But it's very, very interesting. So Secret Squirrel, I hope that answers your questions. But those were great questions for sure, and I did kind of rant on about them a wee bit, but okay. Let's see. A jukebox put more players out of business. Well, the thing with a jukebox is that, I know you're being funny, but the thing with a jukebox is you've got to have records. You've got to have musicians perform to make records that can be played on a jukebox. But for sure, a jukebox does mean that, you know, you just put this box in the corner and people drop their coins into it and it plays the record. But it does mean that some venues therefore don't have a bandstand that musicians can go and play on. And it you know, in the 50s and 60s when these Wurlitzer jukeboxes were being built and installed into all sorts of venues, you know, everyone was just like, hey, you know, there's not going to be any places to play gigs anymore because you just buy the record and you just put it on the jukebox and that's it. You know, bands will just be studio based entirely, just churning out records. Well, I mean, they thought that about Tin Pan Alley. The reason why Tin Pan Alley existed in the 1930s was because they wanted to create a way in which people could get the songs that they had heard home, so that they could play them, so that, you know, they could entertain themselves with it. And this kind of predates the massive explosion of records. Because, you know, in the late 20s and early 30s, it was actually pretty hard to make records, and certainly quite expensive process. And they didn't. The sound quality of them was pretty terrible, but it was doable. But that's why Tin Pan Alley existed. You know, you employed songwriters who would sit in offices with a piano and they would churn out hundreds of songs every week. And these would be compiled into songbooks. It's where George and Ira Gershwin got their start. It's where, you know, all sorts of great songwriters who then went on to have great musical hits or, you know, songs that became jazz standards. You know, Irving Berlin got his start there. Rodgers and Hammerstein got their start there. You know, lots of people got their start on Tin Pan Alley and went on to write great songs that you could sing at home on your piano. So, you know, and everyone thought, hey, you know, this is kind of industrializing music, industrializing the, you know, building an industry of making music. You know, surely it's going to put performers out of business if you can take the songs home and play them yourselves. Why would you need to go to the music hall to hear them? Didn't really change, did it? You know, people still go to music halls. People still go to a musical. People still go to the opera. People still go to gigs. People still go to those kind of things, to big venues to go see their favorite bands, even though the songbooks and the CDs and the MP3s are already available. You can listen to them. You don't even have to leave the comfort of your own home. You can listen to your favorite band. But, you know, it hasn't put people out of business. And Jonny Gibe is here. He says, at physical therapy with my mum. Jonny, we're very glad you're watching. He says, just checking in with everyone on my phone. So glad to see everyone here. Yeah, thank you, Jonny, for chiming in on your phone. I really appreciate it because I know you're trying to make sure that your mum is okay, and is being looked after. And I hope everything is okay. I really do. John Aker says, your choice. Share thoughts on any aspect of the creation and performance aspects of rock operas. Yeah, that is a whole lecture all of its own. I did a thesis paper on rock operas, actually, many years ago. I'm not going to dig it out, but I did a thesis paper on it, and that kind of ended up being also a series of lectures that I did for my composition students, and you know, so they could learn the finer things of rock operas. Rock operas are really interesting. It's not really my favorite thing. It's not really my favorite music. It's not something I would choose particularly to examine in great detail, but it was the assignment that I was set, so I had to study it. So I did. And it was actually really quite interesting, and quite an enjoyable study. And I did like a lecture series of 5 or 6 lectures out of it. But it is very, very interesting. And actually, rock operas are surprisingly complicated. You know, there's loads. There's plenty to choose from. You know, I mean, one of them would be Jesus Christ Superstar, which is interesting because in its day, when Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice wrote that, they conceived of it as a rock opera. But, you know, really now we'd all consider that a musical. We wouldn't really consider it a rock opera, but that was their intent. Their intent was for it to be a rock opera. So what is rock opera? It's essentially, as you say it, it's opera, but instead of having an orchestra that plays in a very strict kind of post-romantic musical tradition, it's kind of an orchestra supplemented with a rhythm section from a rock band, and maybe, you know, some elements of you know, a horn section as well, and some orchestral elements, but mostly it's your classic kind of rock band setup with a horn section and some backing vocalists, and it's you know, it's pretty different, but the whole idea of it is an interesting concept. lot of different time signatures in Superstar. Yeah, there are. It's actually a really interesting take, not only on the story of Jesus from I think they mostly took from the Gospel of Matthew, but they kind of added their own kind of dramatic concepts to it as well. Not that I'm going to get into, kind of the Christian aspect of it, because I don't think that's necessarily appropriate for this show, but certainly from a writing point of view, kind of touchy subject, because not a lot of people would necessarily associate the person of Jesus with rock music. So controversial in many, many ways, and pioneering actually also in many, many ways. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. And it, of course, has spawned a whole bunch of other kind of similar things ever since. But yeah, that's a good question. And it's not really a genre that I have ever spent very much time studying since. Once I'd handed in my assignment, that was it. I closed the door very firmly on rock opera until about 15, 16, 17 years later, when I was required to sit in for another drummer who was sick. And I had to do a whole week in the West End in London playing drums in the band for Jesus Christ Superstar. Having never played it before, I went there, we had one rehearsal, and then that was it. I was straight in. Sight reading the drum book. There are other musicals I would really actually like to be in the pit band for. One of which is The Lion King. Now I know that we're kind of steering away from rock opera and more towards musicals now, but The Lion King is fantastic. The music is stellar. It really is awesome. It's a brilliantly written musical. From just about every point of view, from a storytelling point of view, from a character development point of view, from the fact that, darn it, those melodies are just way too catchy. They are so well written, to the point where, some of the phrases from songs from The Lion King have made their way into popular vernacular. People will quite regularly say, "Hey, Hakuna Matata." You would never have heard that if it hadn't been for The Lion King, or if you had spent some time in Central and Southern Africa. You might have heard that phrase, but otherwise you would never have heard it. And so it's made its way into modern kind of culture, and we kind of know what it means, and we use it, right? Some people use it quite a bit in metaphor or as a cliche. And that's the power of musicals. That's the power of rock opera, that, they can actually have a deep, long-lasting impact on culture, popular culture. But good question. And we've still got 14 people in here, but only 8 of you of those 14 have hit the like button. So it'd be really nice if the rest of you right now would go and hammer that like button. So we can get up to 14 likes as well as 14 people watching right now. If you have not subscribed, go hit that subscribe button, which I think is over there, and the notification bell, which is kind of next to it. And then I think the like button is kind of a little bit over here as well. Hit that like button. Let's get those likes going. Likes are good. Likes help me out. Likes means you like me, you like my content, and you like this show. And the more likes there are, the more it's going to get watched, and the more people are going to come and watch this after the fact. They're going to watch this on the replay, and then they're going to want to do what I've just said: hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and they might get interested in other things that I do here. So if you are new to my channel, and this is kind of your first time hanging around here, and you have hit the subscribe button, give it 5 minutes and you'll be able to say hello in the chat. Because the chat for my shows is subscriber only. So you have to be a subscriber to say hello in the chat. So if you want to say hello, or if you want to ask a question, you need to hit that subscribe button. And then after a period of being subscribed for 5 minutes, you'll be able to ask away in the chat. And that'll be cool. Because I want to meet some new people. Definitely. And the other thing is there's lots of other content on this channel. There's a lot of Studio One content because there just is. And this channel is partnered with Presonus. So there's definitely a lot of Studio One content on here, but there's also other songwriting materials on here as well. There's a mixing series where I mixed one of my songs from scratch, did a fresh mix of it from start to finish. You can go and check that series out as well, because it may well teach you something about mixing. There's also a music theory course that is on this channel as well, and there's going to be in the next week or two, there's going to be a songwriting series that's going to go up on this channel as well. Songwriting for beginners. So if you are a songwriter and you are in the beginning phases of getting involved in songwriting, that's going to go up on the channel as well. I shot it a couple of years ago, but and it had been exclusively made available to an exclusive group, but I've decided to throw it up on the channel and make it freely available at no cost to all of you guys. So if you're into it, it will go up on the channel very, very shortly. Make sure you've hit the notification bell, and then you'll get a notification that it's there and you can go and check it out. I'd appreciate that. So 15 people watching, 12 people liked, which is awesome. So we've gone up from 8 to 12. Thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot. So let's keep the questions coming because I like questions. And that's what this show is about. And we've got about 15 or so minutes left to go. Lollipop Girl is here. She is awesome. And so is Bops as well. Bops is here. Fantastic. And just Bob, one of my awesome moderators, has just walked in, which is cool. Welcome, Bob. Glad you're here. Let's go and see what other interesting stuff we've got in the chat here. Any more questions? Drummer Kenny Aronoff has played on well over 800 records himself. Yes, he is prolific. He is a prolific session musician, and he's played on lots of different records as well, not just records that are in his wheelhouse that he's known for. He's played on a lot of other stuff as well. Another session drummer who has played on some surprising records would be Vinnie Colaiuta. Vinnie Colaiuta is known in jazz circles and in the jazz fusion world, having played with all sorts of fusion artists. He's also played with Sting. He in the 1990s, he was on several of Sting's records and several of Sting's tours, but he's also played on a couple of Metallica records. Would you believe it? I was surprised actually when a friend of mine said, "Hey, check out Vinny's playing, Vinnie Colaiuta. Check out his playing on these Metallica songs." I was just like, Vinnie Colaiuta, Metallica? Really? Yeah. He's actually really, really good. He actually totally nails the Metallica drum parts and the Metallica sound. Really, really great work. And then, you hear him on that, and then you hear him on a big band record. Which I heard him on recently, playing with a modern big band record, and it's really, really impressive. So yeah, there's some great drummers out there to check out. Let's see what else we got. Vinny is brilliant. Yes, Vinny is brilliant. Vinny is a genius. I don't think there are many drummers that can play like he does. To be honest, he's a terrific drummer. Apparently he's also a really, really, really nice guy to go with it. He's not, there's not a lot of ego about Vinny. Given how amazing he is. Roy Haynes, I think one of the first studio drummers way back, not quite one of the first studio drummers. However, Roy Haynes has the unique distinction in jazz music to be pretty much a living legend, because Roy Haynes played with Charlie Parker in 1944 through to 1946. Roy was with Charlie Parker, and then he was with Dizzy Gillespie, and then he played with Miles Davis. But he has played with a veritable who's who of jazz music, all the way through to Pat Metheny and Michael Brecker in the modern period, in the last sort of 30, 40 years. And he is 97 years old, and he is still playing gigs, and he is still playing on records. He is in very high demand as a session musician, having played in everything from bebop all the way through to funk and fusion and rock and pop. He's played pretty much everything. But he's probably the last living witness of the bebop period, and probably one of the last few people who have met and worked with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. So he's a guy I would definitely like to meet and talk to him about that period, because there are so few who are left alive who can tell their story because they were there. Phil Woods, the alto sax player, who would have been about 14, 15, 16 maybe, he played with Charlie Parker, and he actually ended up, after Charlie Parker had died, he ended up marrying Parker's widow. So there you go. Just Bob says, how do you pre-adjust for playing with tracks that will be reversed? Thinking drums and guitar on Hendrix, are you experienced? Meaning those tracks reversed. You have to think backwards, actually. And to be honest, they may not have even known that those tracks were going to be reversed. That may have been a production decision that took place after the recording was done. So maybe there wouldn't have been an awful lot of thought about it. But yeah, you do have to think. You do have to think about how this phrase is going to sound backwards, so that when you play it forwards, you can make it flow. For the most part, when stuff gets reversed, it's not the musicians playing backwards, it's the tape being flipped so that it plays backwards. It will have been recorded in the correct way first, and then the tape would have just been flipped over, and then it would then have been bounced, I guess would be the modern day technical term, bounced forwards. And it is a weird thing. Back in the day with tape machines, you would have to reverse the tape yourself and then feed the output of that tape into another tape machine that's recording the correct way forwards, at the same IPS, the same inches per second. And then you'd have to splice the tape very, very carefully and precisely so that the two would line up, and you wouldn't get any phase issues between the two. It's pretty darn tricky, but it would have been a production technique that was done after the fact rather than... but you can, if you want to make it sound extra kind of good, is actually learn the particular phrase that you want backwards. Learn it backwards. Learn to play it backwards, so you're playing not just the order of the pitches backwards, but you're also playing the rhythms backwards. And then you can throw it forwards. It's pretty interesting. Jonny says, the flip side of the 45 Yummy 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 is a song called Zigzag, an entire song recorded, then the tape flipped backwards. Yeah. And there's an awful lot of that kind of stuff that started going on in the 1960s as, you know, recording engineers started experimenting with such techniques, like making tape loops, for example, in order to repeat something, like repeating, you know, a 4-bar section of a drum part. And, you know, they were kind of doing that in the late 60s before you kind of got to Wendell and Roger Nichols and all of that. You could make drum loops. And then, you know, they discovered, hey, why don't we just flip the tape and make this thing go backwards? And that's when people actually started deliberately going, hey, what if I have this line, but we write it backwards, and then we say it backwards, we sing the line backwards, and then we flip the tape so that it comes out in this weird way forwards, or, you know, the other way round. And then you just bury it in the mix a little bit. Michael Jackson did it. John Lennon certainly has done it, I believe, on some of his records in the early 70s. They called it backwards masking, where you reversed the tape and then you buried it in the mix so that it was more felt than heard. But if you've got a really good set of speakers, or you've got a really good set of headphones, you can hear it and you can discern it. I think on the Michael Jackson record Thriller, there's a couple of lines that Michael spoke rather than sung, and they buried those they flipped them and then buried those in the mix behind the vocal. So you got the vocal singing over the top, you've got the band on top, and then you've got this spoken word thing that then got reversed. And it just creates a really interesting, slightly strange atmosphere, which is perfect for a record like Thriller, because it's all about kind of, certainly the concept for it from the music video seemed to be about horror and, you know, kind of talking about that kind of thing, horror films and that kind of stuff. So creating a slightly disturbing atmosphere by using reverse speech buried in the mix was an interesting little creative production technique that really paid off. So, yeah, that would work for you, for sure. But yeah, interesting production techniques. And the cool thing now is with Studio One, you don't even need to flip any tape anymore. You can just, there's a command, you can just literally reverse the audio. And it's very, very easy now. But back then, you literally had to flip the tape and then bounce it to another tape machine and then splice that into your master tape. And, you know, that means you had a proper splicing knife, and you can get nice little wounds like this one on my thumb here, which I don't know whether you can see very easily. But yeah, I sliced almost all the way through my thumb to get that. Let's see. Backmasking is odd. Sometimes you don't even hear it forward. Stairway to Heaven, a great example. You can find it in YouTube. No singing happening, and only backwards you hear the voice. Yeah. Yeah, all sorts of shenanigans like that went on in the late 60s into the 70s. And as I said, it persisted on into the 80s with Michael Jackson and all of that. So it's an interesting idea. An interesting concept. But yeah, as John says, losing generations with all that back and forth editing. Yeah, you will certainly have degraded tape for sure. But here's the thing, on the backwards, the tape that's flipped, playing backwards, it didn't matter if it got a little bit distorted or, you know, a little bit oxidized, which would then create some interesting, you know, negative harmonics and stuff like that. It didn't really matter, because you're burying this thing in the mix. It's not forward. It's not meant to be heard. It's an effect meant to be felt. For the most part. I mean, sometimes there were phrases that you do want a listener to hear very clearly. And you want the listener to go, what? What was that? and then you go back and you have to listen to the song again. And that was part of the technique. Make the listener go and listen again, because they want to go, what was that? And that makes you listen to the song again. So yeah, but it doesn't matter. And actually, some of the things I have done with Studio One with reversing audio and stuff, actually sometimes I will take a drum track, and I will take maybe a 4-bar loop of this drum track, and I will distort it to Hades, roll off all the low end, make it sound thin, tinny, crackly, overly saturated and disgusting, and then reverse it, and then run it through a phaser and bury it underneath the actual drum track. And it creates a really interesting sound with the drums. In certain genres, it works really, really well. And it's a technique worth trying out. Anyway, certainly worth experimenting with. And of course, you don't get any degradation of the audio unless you deliberately degrade it, which in those cases you would definitely want to do. All right, we have 3 minutes left. I've not even touched the piano yet, which is rare, because normally Songwriting Simplified, you guys are asking harmony questions, and we haven't had a single one of those. Rubber finger cuts are... I don't get what that is, Waveform Laboratory. Rubber finger cuts are SOP for tape razor editing. Yeah, I didn't use rubber fingers. I used my actual fingers. And yeah, that one was really, really painful. I ended up going to hospital, and what they did was they just said, you know what, we're not going to put stitches in it because that'll be worse. So what we'll do is we'll actually use some medical glue, and they glued it together. And they said, it might leave a scar. We're not really sure. We hope it doesn't, but it might, and it did. But it is what it is. It's, I did this many, many years ago, probably 35 years ago, and it's never bothered me. So we've got 2 minutes left, and we don't have... Oh, standard operating procedure. Gotcha. I didn't understand what SOP was. I don't speak in acronyms. LOL, Rolf, or whatever. Billy says, after show Zoom in about 20 minutes, if anyone's interested. So follow Billy's link there if you're interested in having an after show hangout. And Billy's a pretty darn good host, and hopefully there'll be plenty of people there if you guys are up for it. So yeah, follow that link. But yeah, normally we would have all sorts of awesome harmony questions, which we don't. So all right, there we go. That's the end of the show. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We had about 15, 16 people here, which was nice considering it was all kind of a little bit short notice. Hopefully next week we will have a bit more of a fully organized plan. Hopefully Jonny will be here as well, and you'll get the dual banter of both of us. If you have an idea for a subject that you would like us to cover for Songwriting Simplified that both Jonny and I can talk about, then please do drop an email to me here. Go to johnnylipshamstudios.co.uk and fill out the form there. Or you can email Jonny at, I think his email address is jonny@hst-homestudiotrainer.com. You can email him there as well, and we can get show ideas together for that. Also, if you have more detailed questions that you don't want to be limited by the 200 character limitation that you have in the chat, but you still want to ask a question, then again, email either myself or Jonny, and we'll be very happy to take your question. And, you know, email questions we will start the show off with. So that would be cool. We would very much appreciate that. And so the next show that will be on here on my channel is going to be on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. So if there's something more in depth in Studio One that you want to cover, drop me an email. Likewise, you know, the kind of same thing applies to more detailed questions. You can certainly email me as well on that. Otherwise, be back here on Sunday at 6 p.m. Central for Sunday Night Live, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. So until then, folks, I'm going to wish you all a very, very good evening. Good night, folks.